Hi there, welcome to lesson 5 of my jQuery Fundamentals course. In today's lesson, we're going to build this icon builder where we have the option to change maybe the stroke width of the icon, maybe the color of an icon, whether or not the caps on the icon are rounded or squared, and we can change all of these properties out per icon and test it out from here. So let's get started. Inside Webflow, we have HTML embeds holding our SVG icons. All of the icons have a class of SVG icon. We can change the style of those icons using CSS. In this case, if we set the stroke color to red, or maybe the stroke width to something like 3, or even the line cap to round, what we'll notice when we save is that the stroke width, the color, and the line cap changed for all of them. We want the style of each icon to be controlled from the corresponding panel on the side. Inside our grid, we have items. Each item has two parts, the actual clickable card of the icon and then the grid modal, which is the side panel. Each grid item has its own card and side panel. By default, we have a combo class of open on the first side panel to reveal that, and a combo class of open on the first icon to highlight that one. We'll leave these on for both of them. Our first step is anytime we click on any one of our grid cards, we want to get the class of open that was on the previous icon and the previous modal and remove that class from both of them. We'll copy the class of our grid card, head over to our jQuery builder. Our trigger is going to be on click of the grid card. We want to get the class of open anywhere on the page. And for our action, we just want to remove the class of open from any of those elements. We'll go ahead and create a new step. And here, we simply want to get the trigger element, so the grid card we clicked on, and we want to add a class to that grid card of open. But once we add it to the grid card, we also want to add it to the corresponding grid modal. The grid modal is a sibling of our grid card. So we can copy the class of our grid modal. We'll create one more step. And here, we're going to use our trigger element again, and we're going to get the sibling of that trigger element called grid modal, and we're going to add a class to the sibling of open. Now let's copy this code and test it out. On our live site, anytime we click on a card, it removes the class of open from the previous grid card and grid modal and adds it to the new card in the new modal. In Webflow, we also have a form field element. We'll copy the class of that field element, and in our jQuery builder, we'll paste it in as our trigger. And for our trigger type, we're going to listen for a change event. Change events work for most form elements. Anytime the form elements change, whether it's a drop-down, a toggle, or anything like that, we can apply an action to that form element. In this case, anytime someone types on our form field, we want to get the trigger element, or the form field they typed on. And then for our action, we simply want to get the value of that form field. If we leave this field empty, it will return the value that they typed. If we fill it out, it will apply a new value to that form field. In this case, we just want to get the value they typed, so we'll leave the field empty. And then we need to save this value in a variable so we can use it later. Since this field is for our color, we'll go ahead and set a variable of myColor to this field value. To test and see that we're getting the value inside this field, I'll go ahead and copy the class of our field titles here, and then we'll create one more step, and we'll target the class of our title fields, and we'll go ahead and set their text. We'll pull their text from a variable that we created above called myColor, and we'll test this code out. What you'll notice as I begin to type, nothing happens, but once I click off the form field, the text of all these titles are changed to whatever I put here. Ideally, we'd like the color to be changing while the user is typing, not after they click off. For this to happen, we can change our trigger type from change to key up. Key up works for form fields that we type on. Whenever we release our finger off one of the keys, it'll run the event each time. If we copy this code, now on the live site, you'll see while I'm typing, the text inside here is being updated in real time. Now that we know we can use that value, let's use it to change the color of the icon. If we look at our CSS again, we have SVG icon, and then this asterisk is targeting every element inside of our SVG icon embed, and it's setting the stroke color on those elements to a hex code. We'll want to do the same here. Instead of changing our field title, we'll set it to be our SVG icon. We'll add a space and an asterisk to target all of the elements inside the SVG icon, whether it's an SVG path or a group. Instead of changing the text of those paths, we'll go ahead and set their CSS. Instead of setting the background color, we'll set the stroke here. And then instead of applying a color to that stroke, we'll pull it from a variable and use the variable we created above of my color. Now let's copy this. On the live site, as I type, you'll begin to notice that the color is being changed, but for all of the icons. Ideally, we'd only want to change the color of the icon this field pertains to. Since there's 2 SVG icons inside of every grid item, we'll go ahead and copy the class of our grid item. Inside our jQuery builder, we'll change our target to the trigger element. So when the user begins to type on this form field here, it's going to find the form field they typed on. Then we want to get the parent of that form field, which is the entire grid item. So we'll go ahead and paste that class in the parent field. Then inside of this parent, we want to search for children elements with the class of SVG icon, and it should find 2 of them. This one here, and also this one here that's inside the absolutely positioned pop-up. So inside our get children field, we'll paste the SVG icon, we'll add a space, and then we'll add the asterisk. So now when someone types on a form field, we're going to get the parent of that form field, which is the entire grid item. And inside that grid item, we're going to look for children with the class of SVG icon. Now let's copy this code and test it out. Now on the live site, whenever I change the color of a field, only the colors of the corresponding icons are updated. We also want to change the background color of this div that's next to the form field we typed on. Since it's a direct sibling of the actual form field, we can head over to our jQuery builder, create one more step. This time we're going to target our trigger element, which is the form field they typed on. We're going to get the sibling with the class of color. We're going to go ahead and set its CSS. We want to set its background color, but we want to pull the background color from the same myColor variable we created above. Let's copy it and test it out. On our live site, sure enough, when we type a color, it's changing this div and the icons together. Range sliders are a form field element we can use with custom code. And here we have an input set to the type of range. The minimum it could ever be is 0.5 pixels, and the maximum it could ever be is 2.5 pixels. On page load, it's going to start off at a value of 1.2, and we'll step it up each time we drag by 0.1. It has the class of slider, so we'll copy that class and head over to our jQuery builder. Our trigger class is going to be the slider, and we're going to say anytime a change happens on that slider, we're going to use the trigger element, the slider that the user changed. And then for our action, we're going to get the value of it again, and we'll save this in a variable called stroke width. We'll create a new step. And just like the color field, we want this stroke width field to change the width of the icons that are inside of the parent grid item. So we'll copy the class of that grid item. Our target element will be the trigger element. And then we'll get a parent with the class of grid item. Inside of that, we'll find the children with the class of SVG icon. And inside that icon, we'll find all the paths and groups. We want for our action to go ahead and set its CSS again. And here we'll put stroke width. For its value, we'll pull it from a variable we created above called stroke width. Now let's copy it and test it. On our live site, if we drag on the stroke width icon, nothing happens, but when we release, it updates the stroke width only of the icons inside of the corresponding item. We'll notice the stroke width is changing for this icon and that icon. But what if we want the stroke width to change while we're dragging on the field, not just when we let go? In our jQuery builder, we can go ahead and change our trigger type to actually be mouse move. Now, anytime our mouse is moved over our slider element, it's going to get the current value of that slider element and update it. We'll copy and test this code. Now on our live site, when we drag up and down, we can see the stroke width changing in real time. Next, we want to update the stroke caps. By default, the first button in every pop-up has a combo class of selected. Whenever we click on one of the buttons, we want to add the combo class of selected to the correct button. So we'll go ahead and copy the class of our button element. In our jQuery builder, we'll say on click of the button. We want to target our trigger element, and then we want to find siblings with the same class of button. And then the action we want to do is remove the class of selected from those siblings. Then we'll create a new step, get the trigger element again, and this time we're going to add the class of selected to the current one we clicked on. Let's copy it On the live site, now we can change the class for either of these inside of either of the modules, and it's going to remember where one of them left off when we reopen the module. Instead of forcing the user to type whether the cap should be round or square, we can save these in data attributes in Webflow. We'll create a custom attribute and call it data dash, and then we can name the data attribute whatever we'd like. In this case, we'll call it cap because this is the type of data attribute we're going to use. The value of this one will be square. Then we'll select the second button and give it the same name, data cap, but the value of this one is going to be round. We'll go ahead and create a new step. We're going to get our trigger element again, and then for our action, we're going to go ahead and set its attribute. Now, if we remove this second field, it's going to return what the attribute is instead of applying an attribute. Now, we don't want to find out what the URL is. In this case, the URL is empty, but the attribute we want to find is the one we created called data-cap. So if we click on the second button, its attribute will be round. If we click on the first button, its data attribute will be square. Let's save its data attribute in a variable called cap, and let's create one more step. Here we want to update the stroke line cap only of the SVG icons that are inside of the parent grid item. So we'll go ahead and select our trigger element to be our target. We're going to get the parent called grid item. Inside of that, we're going to get any children with the class of SVG icon, and then we're going to find the paths and groups inside. For our action, we'll go ahead and set its CSS, and the CSS we want to set is stroke line cap. And instead of applying square or round here, we actually want to pull from a variable we created above called cap. So based on the button we click on, it's going to apply the right setting here. Let's copy all this code and paste it in our closing body tag section. Let's save and check it out. Now on our live site, if I click on an icon, you'll notice if I switch it to the rounded cap, the strokes are rounded. If I switch it to the square cap, the strokes are square. And this is only happening inside this particular icon. If I switch it to another icon and then decide to go ahead and switch these to rounded, you'll notice that these are now rounded. All of these are working independently. We can set their colors. We can go ahead and set their stroke width. We can set the caps independently. And that wraps up lesson 5. I'll catch you in the next one.